Welcome to the last webinar before we go on a summer break. And I'm delighted to be joined by none other than Dr. Micah Yu, who's a rheumatologist based in California, on this very important topic of autoimmune diseases and plant-based diets. But before we dive into that, I want to thank all our brilliant sponsors who have supported these webinars. We have now done well over 30 webinars since we began this program in April 2020 at the start of the COVID-19 lockdown in the UK. The British Society of Lifestyle Medicine provides CPD accreditation for these webinars, so you will receive a certificate and a copy of the slides in your inbox the day after this session. ProVeg International have provided us with fantastic support, as well as veganfitness.com, who kindly lend us their platform. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rohini Bajekar, and I'm a nutritionist at Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, a community interest group dedicated to promoting the benefits of a whole foods plant-based diet and educating the public and health professionals alike. I'm very excited to announce that we are now taking bookings for the next launch date of the Winchester University Plant-Based Nutrition course on October 4th. And you can sign up via our website. If you scroll down our homepage, you will see the link to find out more about this course. It's the UK's first accredited university course on plant-based nutrition, put together by over 17 plant-based experts, many of whom are on the team or members of Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. This is a 6-week online course accredited for 30 CPD hours, and I've heard from all accounts that it's absolutely incredible. As a reminder, membership of Plant-Based Health Professionals UK is open to everyone, whether you're a healthcare professional or not, and whether you're based in the UK or not. You can visit pbhp.uk to subscribe to our free weekly newsletters and donate if you want to support these webinars, as well as our other advocacy work via pbhp.uk/donate, and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. As a reminder, we will be joined by Dr. Micah Yu for a live Q&A following his presentation. So at any point during the session, if you've got a question, just pop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and let me know if you need anything else during the session. So now I'd like to welcome Dr. Micah Yu, who's going to share his story as well as tell us more about plant-based diets and their role in autoimmune disease.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Micah Yu. I'm a rheumatologist in Newport Beach, California, and my presentation today is on autoimmune diseases and plant-based diets. So a little bit about me. I went to UC Riverside for my undergraduate, got my Bachelor's of Science in Business, and then got my Doctorate of Medicine at Chicago Medical School. I did my internal medicine residency and rheumatology fellowship at Loma Linda University, and I am currently in my integrated medicine fellowship at the University of Arizona. And I'm currently working in private practice here in Newport Beach, where I give my presentation currently. So a little bit about my background. How did I become a rheumatologist and get so passionate about plant-based nutrition? So looking back, my childhood was pretty regular, but I was an overweight kid. I ate everything. I ate a Western diet. That's me in the middle there, the chubbiest one in the screen. My mom gave me everything I wanted to eat. Chicken nuggets, fast food, McDonald's, you name it, I ate it. And in high school, I ended up playing American football. And I was overweight still. I was pretty much very overweight. And I was I was a bench warmer, so I was not always the one on the field. And I wanted to get stronger and I wanted to lose weight at the same time. So what I did was I went on the Atkins diet and I ate a lot of protein. I ate about 150 to 200 grams of protein a day, and I would eat steak, dairy, protein powder, fish, any deli meat, any type of meat out there, I would eat it. And I was losing weight and I did get stronger. However, it came at a cost. I ended up getting gout. In the middle of the night during high school, I woke up and I felt like someone took a piece of wood and slammed it against my toe. And that's not my toe, but that's what it looked like. And over the years, even during medical school, I had these symptoms and joint pain and inflammation that were unexplained. This is a picture of my foot during medical school, and I couldn't walk for a week or two. I was limping. And I went to different rheumatologists, And they couldn't explain my condition. They said you have gout, but you have something else going on that we cannot explain. My C-reactive protein and my ESR were both elevated. And finally, when I went to residency, I did talk to the rheumatologist there at Lowell University, and they did an ultrasound, and they found enthesitis at my elbow. And this is not my ultrasound. This is an ultrasound I found on Google. But that's what it looked like. So finally, they diagnosed me with spondyloarthritis. So if you have heard of ankylosing spondylitis, that's a spondyloarthritis. But there's various kinds of spondyloarthritis. I don't have the back pain, but I had TMJ pain. I had wrist pain, hand pain, knee pain, foot pain, everywhere else. And there were weeks on end where I could not eat. I couldn't open my mouth because there was so much inflammation at my TMJ. All I ate was yogurt and water. And that's what's during medical school. I remember during my IC rotations, I would limp to work because my hip would not be able to go up. I had to physically use my hands to lift my leg into the car because it wasn't cooperating. So I refused all the medications that were recommended to me because I thought there was a way out, but I didn't know what it was. So I ended up reading Dr. Greger's How Not to Die or Watch Forks Over Knives. And within a couple months, I started a plant-based diet. And within 3 months, my joint pains went away completely. And my C-reactive protein went completely negative after being positive for 10 years. And was having flares at least anywhere from every 2 weeks to every couple months. And that was gone completely. So because of my significant improvement, I went on social media. I created my Autoimmune MD to spread the good message about how diet and lifestyle can affect your autoimmune disease and arthritis. And me and my wife is Dr. Melissa Mandala. She's part of American College of Lifestyle Medicine. She's one of the board of directors. And together we created a private practice called Dr. Lifestyle. And this is where we serve our patients in Newport Beach. So what are the objectives of today's talk? So I'm going to talk about briefly on how does autoimmune disease start and the role of plant-based diets in autoimmune disease. We're going to talk about how the gut microbiome affects the immune system, and then briefly touch on how inflammation affects the immune system as well in autoimmune disease. So I apologize. My PowerPoint wasn't working, so I'm doing Google for my PowerPoint. And this is, so right here, there's actually supposed to be words. So pretty much during my fellowship, I did see a patient who had severe rheumatoid arthritis, seronegative rheumatoid arthritis. She was on multiple biologics before seeing me. She cut out dairy, and after that, she started actually improving, and she was able to start getting off her biologics. She went through like 5 biologics. And when she saw me, I encouraged her to go on a whole food plant-based diet, just not cutting out dairy. And within a year's time, she was able to get off all steroids, all medications, including hydroxychloroquine. And CDAI score is how we measure disease activity in rheumatoid arthritis. As you see here, the higher the number, the more the activity. And her CDAI score eventually went to 0, meaning she had no morning stiffness, no pain, 0 disease activity. So a whole food plant-based diet is what really helped her. And currently in the UK, there's about 4 million people living with an autoimmune condition. That's over 6% of the population. That was from Connect Immune Research. Autoimmune disease is on the rise. This is from the Journal of Celiac Disease, and it's about 5 to 7% a year increase across all systems. And the question is why? Why is it doing that? And I think it's multifactorial. Autoimmune disease is made up of both genetics and the environment. You can't have one without the other. Some people, the genetics is much stronger, and so some it's much less. And for some people, it'll be easier to trigger autoimmune disease. So how does autoimmune disease start? So first of all, there's something called loss of immune tolerance. So immune tolerance is pretty much your immune system is not really reacting to a certain stimuli. So your immune system is not supposed to react to its own cells to attack it. And in autoimmune disease, there is a loss of immune tolerance where your body starts attacking itself. And why is that? Well, we don't exactly have all the answers, but here are some potential factors. There's nutrition, stress, infections, whether viruses or bacterial that can cause a loss of immune tolerance, environment, So the pollution has been associated with rheumatoid arthritis. Vaccines can cause autoimmune disease as well. That's in the literature also. Drugs and smoking, physical fitness. Are you overweight? Are you obese? Obesity has been linked to chronic inflammation. Trauma, was there any abuse previously, that has been associated with autoimmune disease as well. So those are just some of the factors out there. Studies have shown that antibodies actually show positive about 10 years prior to diagnosis, potentially, in rheumatoid arthritis and both lupus. So antibodies show up first before clinical symptoms. So one way that we can get autoimmune disease potentially is through molecular mimicry. So when you get an infection, whether viral or bacterial, sometimes that virus and bacteria can look like one of our cells in the body. So this is an example where a peripheral nerve cell looks like Campylobacter. So you see here, it's very, very similar. And your body can sometimes react to that and start attacking itself, thinking that it's the Campylobacter, and sometimes that can spark an autoimmune disease. Another way that autoimmune disease also can be potentiated is through bystander effect. So each cell, such as a T cell, has a specific antigen that it does latch onto. However, because of inflammatory signals called cytokines, it can activate other T cells and other immune cells in the body to get it wrapped up and start attacking as well. So those are just some of the theories out there. Next, we're going to talk about how plant-based diets can affect autoimmune disease. And we'll be going over anti-inflammatory foods and pro-inflammatory foods. And then we're going to touch on diets that have been studied as well. So you all know about this phytonutrients, very, very powerful. We don't need this to survive, but we do need these to have an optimal health. And all the colors of the rainbow are very, very special. So curcumin, I'm sure you've heard of this, very, very anti-inflammatory, and I'm going to tell you why today. There's an anti-inflammatory mechanism of curcumin. There's over 6,000 studies on curcumin alone. And one of the T cells that it does affect is called the T regulatory cells. T regulatory cells are important for infection control and also for autoimmune disease. When it comes to infections, your body will fight viruses and bacteria, but how does it know that you shouldn't fight it anymore when the war is over against that bacteria? That's where T regulatory cells come in. It calms down the immune system. And in autoimmune disease, T regulatory cells are found to be very low or depleted, such as lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. So T regulatory cells tells your body's immune system to stop attacking itself. And in the autoimmune disease, like I said, it's very low. And curcumin actually acts on it, tries to upregulate T regulatory cells to calm down the immune system. So that's one of the mechanisms that curcumin acts on. And T regulatory cells are going to come up again and again in this talk because it's very important, even in the gut microbiome. Curcumin has also an anti-inflammatory effect on other signals as well. It acts on tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-6, and interleukin-1. These are all pro-inflammatory cytokines. And as I mentioned earlier, cytokines are cell-to-cell communication signals. And in rheumatology, we have medications and biologics that attack both tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-6, and interleukin-1. Curcumin has also been studied in different diseases as well, including cancer, neurologic disease, and other autoimmune diseases, such as scleroderma, psoriasis, and multiple sclerosis. So I always recommend, well, not always, but I do recommend curcumin quite frequently to my patients, either natural or through supplements. Next, we can talk about another phytonutrient as an example called resveratrol. This is found in grapes, and this is what gives red wine its benefits. And resveratrol has been studied at the level of the joint as well. Theoretically, it does block some pro-inflammatory signals. So it does potentially block interleukin-17, which is another pro-inflammatory cytokine that we have medications for in rheumatology. And it can block other signals as well. NF-kappa beta, which is pro-inflammatory as well, is a signal in the cell, and COX-2 and PGE2 also. So there's many benefits to eating grapes and having resveratrol. Resveratrol has also been studied in multiple autoimmune diseases, such as RA, psoriasis, lupus, and inflammatory bowel disease, for example, and many other diseases as you see on the screen. So those are just some examples of phytonutrients that have been shown to have an anti-inflammatory effect. Next, we'll jump to fiber. Fiber is one of our most favorite topics in lifestyle medicine and in plant-based nutrition because there's so many benefits to it. This was a study in the American Journal of Medicine, and this is based on the NHANES data over 11 years. And what they found was that the more fiber the participant ate, the study participant ate, the lower the risk of metabolic syndrome, the lower the risk of inflammation as measured by C-reactive protein, and the lower the risk of obesity. So there's many benefits of fiber. Fiber has also been studied in rheumatology and arthritis care and research. And what they found in osteoarthritis was that the higher the amount of fiber the patient ate, the lower the risk of having knee pain. In addition to fiber, omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids have to be mentioned. Omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory, and omega-6 fatty acids are generally known to be pro-inflammatory. However, there are some anti-inflammatory components to it, and they're always in competition, and we should have more omega-3 fatty acids than omega-6 fatty acids. In our Western diet, there's too much omega-6 fatty acids going on, and it's very, very pro-inflammatory. Your plant-based diet and Mediterranean diet are great for omega-3 fatty acids. The Mediterranean diet has a lot of fish in it, and fish has been shown to have a lot of omega-3 fatty acids. As we know, they get it from algae in the ocean. Olive oil in some studies have also been shown to be anti-inflammatory as well. And the reason why omega-3 fatty acids are so anti-inflammatory is because they break down to EPA and DHA. Eventually, that goes down to resolvents and protectants. And resolvents and protectants are what resolves our inflammation in the body. And so when you have autoimmune disease and you're getting better, your resolvents and protectants are at work. And in plant-based nutrition, the ALA from flax seeds and chia seeds, they don't break down that well to EPA and DHA. So I do recommend my patients take algae supplement if they're vegan. And omega-6 fatty acids are characterized by our Western diet, the processed and red meat, the refined oils, the French fries, all the junk food out there. That has a lot of omega-6 fatty acids. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. So I call this the Super Bowl food in America. So this is what Americans typically eat when their American football is at the final game, the championship game. Very, very high in sugars and oil and just a lot of processed food. And I want to touch on some inflammatory foods. So salt in excess has been shown to be inflammatory. So salt itself is not inflammatory, but in excess is, because it does increase T helper 1 and T helper 17 cells, and it can downregulate T regulatory cells. And this from New England Journal of Medicine. So interleukin 1, 623, tumor necrosis factor, and interleukin 17 are all pro-inflammatory cytokines. And salt can activate this when in excess. And the reason why I point these all out is because these are all rheumatology biologics that we have to block all these cytokines. And when you're eating a lot of salt, you're fighting against the medications that we're giving. So I always tell my patients, try to either do a no salt diet or a very low salt diet so that you don't stimulate your inflammatory cytokines. And this has been studied in rheumatology journals as well, in lupus nephritis and rat models. This has been studied on. And what they found was that high salt diet rats had higher double-stranded DNA and higher urine protein, which shows that there's higher lupus activity. And also T helper 17 cells were elevated, as well as interleukin 17, which are pro-inflammatory T cells and cytokines. So try to lower your salt intake as much as possible. Advanced glycation products have to be mentioned as well. These are proteins and lipids that become linked to sugars, and there's a couple of them. And this is studied in American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, and it shows that AGEs, or age, can activate NF-kappa beta, which then will send down pro-inflammatory signals downstream. Food is related to age, and what they found was that the higher temperature does increase age, and if you cook with more moisture, it does downregulate age. And animal products, especially fried bacon, have the highest AGEs. Vegetables and fruits have the lowest, unless you're eating French fries, which has refined oil. And processed foods and fats have a higher content of AGEs. So try to limit animal products, refined oil, and fats as much as possible. AGEs have also been studied in rheumatology, and it was studied in adult onset Still's disease and also in lupus. And what they found was that the higher AGEs that were found in the plasma, the higher disease activity of adult onset Still's disease and lupus. Adipokines, which are found from fat cells, have also been studied, and they do affect the immune system. So your fat cells are not just sitting there. They do affect the immune system. They affect your hormones, and they can be very, very inflammatory. So they affect your T cells, your B cells, and your T regulatory cells, as well as the innate immune system as well. So both the innate and the adaptive immune system are affected. And obesity does affect autoimmune disease as well because of all the pro-inflammatory cytokines. Obesity is a state of chronic inflammation, has been studied to show that it can increase some C-reactive protein as well. So be very careful of obesity and try to lose weight as much as possible to get your BMI at a regular normal. Next, we're going to look at some studies on diets that have been done in rheumatology. So this was one of the earliest studies on rheumatoid arthritis that I could find. This is by Dr. Panish out at University of Southern California, about half an hour from where I live. And this looked at the I think he did an elemental diet. And he basically eliminated herbs, he eliminated meat, he eliminated fruits, he eliminated dairy as well. And the studies were mixed. The participants, some improved, some didn't. So there wasn't any conclusive evidence that diet could help in this study. This is a study by Dr. McDougall, which most of you probably know. This is a 4-week study on a very low-fat vegan diet in RA patients. And what they found was that RA symptomatology did improve. C-reactive protein also improved as well, but morning stiffness did not improve that much in these patients. Rheumatoid arthritis is, as you can see, the part of the most studied on diets in rheumatology. This is another study by, I'm going to mess up the name, but Jeltsin Kra. And so he put 2 groups. One group of patients, the control group, were omnivores, and the other group were fasting for about, I think, 1 to 2 months. And then they went on a vegan diet followed by a vegetarian diet. And what they found was that the experimental group that was fasting and on vegetarian diet did improve significantly. And the effects were actually felt 1 year after going on the vegetarian vegan diet. So very, very powerful study. This study, I think, was done in 1999. As you can see here, it's from the same study. And let's see here. This was the morning stiffness did improve compared to the control group. Pain did improve. And also grip strength improved as well. Tender joints, swollen joint swelling did improve. ESR, C-reactive protein all improved. So a lot of objective measures did improve. So this is a pretty powerful study, I would say. Another diet out there on Mediterranean diet and rheumatoid arthritis, another experimental study. This showed that the Mediterranean diet did help patients also with rheumatoid arthritis. So I would say a whole food plant-based diet, vegetarian diet, vegan diet, and Mediterranean diet can be very good anti-inflammatory diets. Another study out there on lupus and diets. So lupus hasn't been very well studied with diets. However, I did come across some studies. This was a food questionnaire that they sent out to lupus patients. over 1 year. They looked at what kind of food they ate over the past year. And what they found was that lupus patients that had more disease activity had a higher carbohydrate intake, lower fiber intake, and lower polyunsaturated fat intake. So these patients were probably eating a lot of refined carbohydrates, a lot of your Western diet foods, and not eating many omega-3 fatty acids. So they weren't eating the foods that are the backbone of an anti-inflammatory diet. So this is image that I found in the lupus and diet article. And what they showed was that curcumin, vitamin A, D, and EGCG from green tea can upregulate T regulatory cells. As you remember, T regulatory cells are anti-inflammatory T cells. And what they find also is that it can block some of these pro-inflammatory cytokines and signals. So in rheumatology, we do have a biologic that does block BAFF and APRIL called Benlysta. We do have vitamin D here that can block interleukin-17. Vitamin D is very important for autoimmune disease and immune system in general. I do get it always normal and above normal as well. And so studies have shown that vitamin D, when it's low and deficient, lupus patients can flare more, and rheumatoid arthritis patients can flare more as well. You have vitamin D receptors in your immune cells and also your gut cells as well. So please get your vitamin D levels normal if you have autoimmune disease patients. Obesity, as I mentioned earlier, is a state of chronic inflammation, and obesity has been studied in lupus as well, and it does show that C-reactive protein was much higher in obesity patients, and interleukin-6 was higher as well compared to normal overweight patients. And fiber was studied in lupus as well. In Japan, over a 4-year period, using a food frequency questionnaires, and the study just showed that vitamin D6 levels and dietary fiber was inversely associated with risk of disease activity. Sorry about that, my phone keeps going off. Let me just turn off the sound here. Okay. And finally, so we have psoriatic arthritis and diet here, and this was from your doctors over in the UK, from American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine on psoriatic arthritis with a whole food plant-based diet. And there was a case study on a 4-year-old female who went on a whole food plant-based diet and did go to remission. And the patient did go on a low salt, sugar, oil diet. The patient was previously on methotrexate and I believe some other medications, but did not improve as much as she wanted to. So diet is very, very powerful, and it should be the foundation, and if needed, medications. So thank you for this study, Dr. Kassam. And Mediterranean diet and psoriatic arthritis has also been studied. And what it did show was that adherence to a Mediterranean diet did decrease psoriatic arthritis activity, including inflammation, joint pain, and morning stiffness. And this was a study over out in Italy, over 5 centers. And how about gout? Gout is not an autoimmune disease, but it is a rheumatologic disease, rheumatic arthritis, and I do have it as well. And the myth was this whole time that fruits are bad for gout. And I see this time and time again from my referrals and from other patients as well. So fruits does not stimulate gout and uric acid. And this is from a prominent journal, Journal of Rheumatology. And what it does show is that the fructose from fruits is blunted by the fiber and from the phytonutrients, such as vitamin C, flavonoids, and catechins. And it does block the elevation of uric acid. But if you get sugar and fructose from soft drinks, your sodas, your candies, then it can give you hyperuricemia. So don't avoid fruits in gout. It can be beneficial because of the anti-inflammatory effect. And in gout, it's stimulated by the innate immune system and a signal called the NLRP3 and the inflammasome. And this is can be stimulated by high-fat diets and high cholesterol diets and lack of exercise. And omega-3s, fasting from ketones can help as well, calorie restriction. Phytonutrients can be very useful in inflammasomes, such as quercetin, EGCG, resveratrol. These are very beneficial against inflammasomes. And inflammasomes, like I said earlier, are the inflammatory signals from the innate immune system. So let's talk about the gut microbiome, which is very, very important for rheumatology and autoimmune disease, and it's now a hot topic in our rheumatology conferences as well. So the role of gut microbiome is for nutrient metabolism, drug metabolism, immunomodulation, and antimicrobial protection. The gut microbiome, I'm sure your GI doctors on this webinars have mentioned it time and time again. It's affected not only by diet, but how you're born, your gender, your genetics, your previous infections, sleep, exercise, stress, your age, and these can all potentially trigger autoimmune disease. Gut dysbiosis has been studied and shown in lupus, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's, as well as vasculitis. And some of these diseases don't normally affect the GI tract, and they still give you gut dysbiosis. Short-chain fatty acids are very important, and they do affect the gut microbiome, and they are broken down and come from fiber and is converted from your bacteria into short-chain fatty acids, which can decrease NF-kappa beta, which is one of the inflammatory signals inside the cell, and they can promote T regulatory cells and immune tolerance, which is very important. This is from the Journal of Cell, very prestigious journal. Acetate, butyrate, and propionate are your 3 short-chain fatty acids that we like to focus on. And short-chain fatty acids don't just stay at the gut, they do affect the lungs, your fat cells, your brain, your liver, your pancreas, your bone marrow. These are just examples of the various organs and cells that they do affect. And your diet will affect your gut microbiome. This study from the Journal of Nature Reviews Rheumatology, and it can, if you're eating an anti-inflammatory diet, if you're eating a pro-inflammatory diet, block T regulatory cells and induce T helper 17 cells, and then the inflammatory interleukin 17, which will potentially cause autoimmune disease if you have the right genetic background. So be very careful of the diets. And the leaky gut is a real phenomenon, not just a myth, and it's been shown in many rheumatic diseases. And the leaky gut is essentially, I'm not going to explain the basics of this because you probably heard of this time and time again from your colleagues, but leaky gut is basically your cells, the tight junctions are not completely closed anymore, and there's a loss of barrier function, and this can be from gut dysbiosis, and basically your small food particles or small viruses or bacterial cells and things you don't want to leak through can leak through, and then can talk and stimulate T helper 17 cells, which then can induce pro-inflammatory signals. Let's take a wider view of the gut microbiome. And like I said earlier, different factors can affect the gut microbiome and induce gut dysbiosis. And most of your immune cells are at the Peyer's patch. About 60 to 70% of your immune system is at the gut. So it's very important that we focus on diet and other factors that affect the gut microbiome. And your immune cells, they just don't stay at the Peyer's patches. They do come out and go through the circulatory system, lymphatic system, and go to the lymph nodes, and then can go through the systemic circulation and go through the various organs in the body. And like I mentioned earlier, potential mechanisms of autoimmune disease are the bystander effects, molecular mimicry, and epitope spreading, which I didn't mention. And this is a very recent article in 2021 in Nature Reviews on the gut joint axis. One of my favorite axes. I am very biased about that, of course. And so we have the gut-brain axis and gut-lung axis, and this is just one of the axes out there. And so how does rheumatoid arthritis exactly get affected by the gut microbiome? So gut dysbiosis can potentially cause pro-inflammatory signals from T helper 17 cells, which then goes to the circulatory system that can potentially go into the joints, as well as ILC3, which will send pro-inflammatory signals as well. So this is just a theory, and I believe it's true. And also gut joint axis is seen in spondyloarthritis as well. This is ankylosing spondylitis, and these are the various joints that it does affect. And about 40% of individuals with ankylosing spondyloarthritis, there is a healthy gut. About 10% do have a crossover with inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease with arthritis is also a spondyloarthritis as well. So there's a lot of crossover. And about 50% with spondyloarthritis will have a subclinical gut inflammation. So not overt gut inflammation where you have inflammatory bowel disease, but through biopsy, they did find inflammation. So those are two examples of a gut joint axis. Not only is your gut affected, but your oral microbiome is affected as well. So in rheumatology, we do notice that when you have periodontitis, you have very bad teeth, you can induce PAD enzyme from the P. gingivalis bacteria, which will then increase CCP antibodies from this bacteria called PAD. And it's very well known in rheumatology, so I always check my patient's teeth. And also, the PAD enzyme can be activated by smoking, another very popular environmental pollutant that we know in rheumatology that can stimulate rheumatoid arthritis as well, and in different other rheumatic diseases. So I always tell my patients, you gotta stop smoking or else you can't get better, or you're gonna fight the medications I'm giving you. So that's one of the first things that has to go in. Even with patients with a past smoking history, this can still be a factor. And epigenetics can also affect the gut microbiome. So your genes are fixed, but your gene expressions are not fixed. And through various pathways, it can decrease NF-kappa beta and decrease inflammation by inhibiting histone deacetylase. And in autoimmune disease, through gut dysbiosis, it can upregulate pro-inflammatory signals such as NF-kappa beta, which will increase T helper 17 cells, which I've mentioned multiple times in this talk, and downregulate T regulatory cells, and that will increase inflammation and histone deacetylase. And this has been studied in our rheumatology as well. We have tried inhibiting histone deacetylase. There hasn't been any FDA approved in America for blocking histone deacetylase in arthritis. And I don't think there'll be one anytime soon. I think there was a drug in Europe that has been approved, not for arthritis, but for some other condition. So this is something that has a lot of potential. But naturally, our phytonutrients are natural histone deacetylase inhibitors, so they have a natural anti-inflammatory signal on the epigenetics. So your curcumin and turmeric, one of my favorites, genistein in soy, and quercetin in apples and onions, resveratrol. So many different phytonutrients have a potential anti-inflammatory effect. Of course, these are not all studied in humans. Many of these are probably animal studies and in vitro. But nonetheless, we do have to pay attention to this because there's a lot of potential in the future. And that can explain why when patients go on a whole food plant-based diet, that their autoimmune disease can go to remission or get better. So overall, the Western diet is very, very inflammatory. Gut dysbiosis is potentiated by red meats and processed meats, sugars, artificial sweeteners, which I didn't mention, but I always tell my patients to get off their artificial sweeteners, saturated fats, omega-6s, gluten, potentially another pro-inflammatory cause, salt as well, which I mentioned. The main two signals that patients should always pay attention to are omega-3 fatty acids and phytonutrients, which are the backbone to any anti-inflammatory diet, which is why whole food plant-based diets and Mediterranean diets are good for an anti-inflammatory diet. So is a gut dysbiosis a cause or consequence of autoimmune disease? That's $1 million question here. And finally, about a couple years ago, we do have some answers, but we don't have 100% answer. So this was the American College of Rheumatology, and they did look at HLA alleles in RA ankylosing spondylitis. And what they found was that having HLA B27 and one of the HLA alleles in RA, these patients did have a different gut microbiome compared to controlled patients who did not have any of these diseases. And the gut microbiome as well, with their family members who did have no disease, it was also different as well. And in ankylosing spondylitis, there is increased gut permeability, and it's been found there's been some gut permeability in the first degree health relatives as well as unrelated healthy controls. And gut dysbiosis has been seen in HLA-B27 mice prior to the onset of clinical disease in gut or joints. So just having this genetic factor can predispose to gut dysbiosis already. So I think it's a little bit of both. If you ask me whether it's the genes or the disease itself, I think there's some underlying gut dysbiosis already, and adding the inflammatory signals such as Western diets, lack of exercise, stress, all these things will potentiate the gut dysbiosis and potentially eventually lead to overt clinical disease. And finally, I'm going to touch briefly on the role of inflammation in autoimmune disease. I know I'm out of time here. So obesity does contribute to chronic inflammation by upregulating TLR17 cells, upregulating interleukin-1, and we do have medications such as secukinumab and anakinra in rheumatology to block these signals, and they can eventually lead to autoimmune disease. And also spondyloarthritis, as you see here, there's interleukin-23. We have medications to block this. Secukinumab and secukinumab are two biologics we have. Interleukin-17, as I mentioned earlier. So a lot of rheumatology and autoimmune disease is shown to be based off of inflammatory pathways. So whenever you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, you're fighting inflammation, and inflammation is the backbone to a lot of diseases, including cancer and some GI disease, such as inflammatory bowel disease. And this is all our medications in rheumatology are based off of these pathways. And lupus, it's so complicated, but some of the medications we have are for rituximab, anti-CD20, anti-BAFF, which is belimumab, also known as Benlysta, anti-interleukin-12 and 23 is secukinumab, and JAK inhibitors can potentially be used as well. And when you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, like I said, you're finding some of these inflammatory signals. And in rheumatology, for rheumatoid arthritis, these are some of the medications we're using as well. Methotrexate, which I mentioned in one of the case studies for psoriatic arthritis, anti-TNF alpha, anti-leukin-6, anti-CD20, and B cells. These are just examples. So a lot of medications, a lot of tools we have in rheumatology and rheumatic disease, autoimmune diseases. But I mean, I've seen patients go on these medications and sometimes they don't do well. They do get better or they develop resistance. So, or they get cancer, some side effects that we don't want. So diet should be the backbone and foundation. So if patients can get better through lifestyle medicine and nutrition, that should be the first line. So in summary, plant-based diets can be an effective tool for patients with autoimmune disease. Fiber and phytonutrients, like I mentioned time and time again, are the foundation to any anti-inflammatory diet. Plant-based diets are not a magic bullet. I just want to share that because I have some patients who are on very, very restricted whole food plant-based diets, and their disease has progressed where their hands are deformed and they have avoided medications at this time. So I just want to point that out there. But for some patients, it could potentially improve and induce remission. So every patient has different genetics, a different gut microbiome, and a different lifestyle. So if your patients are not getting better or not getting to the point where they need to be on a plant-based diet, please send them to a rheumatologist or the specialist of choice so that they can get on proper medications. And more studies still need to be done on diets and autoimmune rheumatic diseases. Vasculitis is a disease that doesn't have many diets studies out there. So that's another very, very inflammatory disease that I have not talked about. So if you're interested in my work and what I do, I am on social media. You can find me at myautoimmunemd on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok if you want to see me dance, and Twitter. And if you want to see me internationally, I do see patients from the UK and worldwide. I've had some patients from Ireland and London already. And my website clinically is drlifestyle.org, where my wife, is also a family medicine and lifestyle medicine doctor. And myautoimmunemd.com is my personal website. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was incredibly informative, and you covered so many different aspects of autoimmune disease. And I loved hearing your story. I think it's always really powerful when people share their own story, and your journey obviously must be really inspiring to your patients of how you experienced that yourself. That was your diet before you weren't born, sort of eating whole foods, plant-based, and you've been on that journey with you and your wife yourself, of now spreading that message and that awareness to your patients.
Thank you.
So we already have so many different questions, but I'm going to dive straight in because there are quite a few there. And one of the ones that I can see coming up again and again is about gluten and leaky gut. So would you be able to go into that in a bit more detail and what your thoughts are on gluten for people with autoimmune conditions?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a very hot topic. So many different opinions about that. So gluten has been studied. And one of the people that are very well known in the space is Dr. Fasano out in Harvard. He has studied gluten and the leaky gut. It's a real phenomenon, and gluten can cause the leaky gut. But whether that translates clinically into flares and inflammation is another story. I think that's very individualized. I have patients who eat gluten who are doing just fine. I eat gluten, I do okay. I do eat bread that has gluten. I do fine on that. But there's some patients out there, they touch gluten and they will flare. Whether that's the wheat can potentially be the inflammatory. There's so many factors to this. It's not as simple as it is. That's why a whole food plant-based diet, if patients are eating gluten, they can still flare. There's a glyphosate, which is another hot topic. Glyphosate is from the insecticides that can induce a leaky gut as well. So many different opinions about this. So I tell my patients, if you're eating gluten and you feel like you're doing well, just continue eating it, because if you look at some of the studies out there in the Journal of Gastroenterology, some of these other studies, people that eat gluten are some of the healthiest and people in the world. They do live longer sometimes, and you get fiber from it. When you eat a very, very dense bread with gluten in it, there is fiber. Fiber is anti-inflammatory. So I would say it's very individualized. But yes, it can be very inflammatory for some individuals.
No, I'm pleased to hear you say that. I think, again, you kind of said about people kind of listening to their body and understanding what works for them. But of course, perhaps exploring some of the intact grains that contain gluten, like bulgur wheat, things like that might be a good option for people who may not find that bread agrees with them as much.
Yeah, you just got to experiment with one food at a time. I mean, if none of the gluten works, then it doesn't work. But there's so many grains out there that don't have gluten too.
Wonderful. And would you be able to go into a bit more detail about fats and oils, and specifically you mentioned about AGEs and avoiding high fat foods. Obviously oil is 100% fat. What are your views on oils? And obviously there's a whole category there, so there's quite a lot of range when you look at oils.
Yeah, so another great question. So oils, I know some diets are no salt, sugar, oil in the whole food plant-based community. I don't think every patient needs to go down that path. I've seen patients go to remission, even having eaten some oil and some salt in their diets. But I would say overall, the oil, refined oil is inflammatory, like vegetable oil, canola oil, sunflower oil. I always tell my patients, you're going to have one oil, then choose olive oil, extra olive virgin oil. The studies have shown that to be potentially anti-inflammatory, but overall, some patients can't even tolerate extra olive virgin oil. I think it's very individualized. I mean, I eat oil from time to time, and I don't flare after one meal of oil. Even though I have arthritis and autoimmune disease. But some patients, it always comes down to genetics and the environment. How strong is their autoimmune disease? Because some patients in rheumatology, they'll flare all the time, even when you put them on medications. Some patients that go a whole food plant-based diet, they will continue to progress like some of my patients. So it's very individualized. But overall, I would say cut out most of those refined oils. And just leave out olive oil if you're going to have some oil.
And stick to fats from whole plant foods, so
Exactly.
nuts and seeds and things.
Exactly.
Wonderful. So would you be able to go into a bit more detail about dairy? Because there was a question about soy milk and whether it is healthier than having dairy, but specifically about, all the different types of dairy for autoimmune disease. What are your thoughts when looking at the evidence?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've tried to scour the literature for this, and there's not been anything that very strong, or if anything at all. So dairy, in my opinion, is pretty inflammatory overall for autoimmune disease patients. And the question is, why? Is it the casein? Is it the cow protein in it? Um, I mean, there hasn't been studies directly showing that casein is inflammatory for lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. I couldn't find anything out there. I don't know if you guys have, but I've noticed in my patients, some of them just cut out dairy and they do better. And some, like that one patient I had, she cut out dairy and she got a lot better before seeing me, and she was not eating whole food plant-based. Some patients have to cut out dairy and go whole food plant-based to get better. So everyone's a little bit different. So what is it? Is it the casein? I don't know what your opinion is, Rohini, but I think it's probably that's one of the answers.
Well, I suppose there's so many issues with dairy, and there's no nutrient that's present within dairy that we can't get from a whole food plant-based diet. So, for example, the calcium that's there, definitely it's far more optimal to get it from all the other amazing whole plant foods that are out there, like the green leafy vegetables that are so beneficial and anti-inflammatory, and calcium set tofu, and there's so many other wonderful sources that I don't think it's essential for human health, and especially given that 70% of the population has some degree of lactose malabsorption. I think that it's just not an essential food, and it contains a lot of other harmful components like the saturated fat and
Exactly.
cholesterol. So I would definitely not, I personally don't recommend it to my clients for that reason, but I wondered if there was anything specific. Definitely, I think there's looking into it, the links between type 1 diabetes and dairy consumption. There's kind of research going on looking at the link between those two things. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that specifically.
Yeah, I haven't looked into type 1 diabetes. I don't look for studies for that normally. So I don't have any answers for you, but for rheumatic disease and autoimmune disease, in general, no strong studies, but hopefully there'll be more in the future.
Definitely. And one of the other questions was around multiple sclerosis. If you have any thoughts about that, I know that there's some people who are doing really well on a plant-based diet with multiple sclerosis. But have you had any experience with this, and do you have any thoughts about what would be best?
Yeah, I don't have patients with multiple sclerosis. That usually goes to neurology, but I've looked at some of the studies out there. I mean, there are studies that show high fat processed diet can make multiple sclerosis worse. I didn't have time to put it in there today. But whole food plant-based diet, I mean, they're both autoimmune diseases, such as, just like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, it's all based around the gut dysbiosis. It's based around inflammation and controlling that inflammation. And with the whole food plant-based diet, like you said, you're getting the phytonutrients, you're getting the fiber, and that itself is the foundation, and that will help multiple sclerosis, because multiple sclerosis is a disease of inflammation. And some of the medications we use in rheumatology, we use also in multiple sclerosis, such as rituximab, a B-cell inhibitor. So overall, I think a whole food plant-based diet can be very effective for multiple sclerosis. And I'm not surprised you're in remission. I'm very happy for you. I know you probably know Dr. Sarai Stanchik. She's another doctor in America who has MS as well, who's in remission also.
Yes, so we actually had her on the webinar program last year, and her documentary Code Blue is fantastic for anyone who's listening who'd like to check that out. Highly recommend that. I'm just going to launch a poll to get everyone's feedback on the webinar, just while we continue chatting. So one of the questions that I can see coming up, and you probably get this all the time, Micah, is about supplements, and specifically this one's on probiotics and your view on probiotic supplements for people with autoimmune disease.
Yeah, so probiotics is so tricky because sometimes you don't know if it's actually giving you what it says on the bottle. And you don't know if it's actually, the probiotics are actually reaching to the site of destination. Sometimes the acid can destroy the probiotics as well. And there's so many brands out there. I personally have not prescribed probiotics to my patients yet because I don't have any concrete answer for them. I mean, some of them do say that they took a probiotic and they got better. Some of them said that they took a probiotic and they got worse. So it's hard to say which one's working at this time. And the studies are still coming out for it. If you look at the studies, sometimes they'll show that this disease has more of this gut bug, and some disease, and it will show, some studies will show something else. So I always tell my patients, get your probiotics and prebiotics naturally from your food sources, and then we can talk about the supplements.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So one of the questions that has been upvoted the most is about whether there are good resources for plant-based advice specifically for rheumatology conditions that can be shared with patients. Are there any resources that you could point everyone in the direction of?
Yeah, I don't have any resource right now, nothing that has been written by a rheumatologist or someone reputable. I do have, there's an integrated medicine book that I'm reading about, that I've read, that was written by a doctor. So I do recommend that. It's not plant-based, but it does center around phytonutrients, lifestyle medicine, and it was recommended by University of Arizona, where I'm taking my integrated medicine fellowship. So if you're interested about how stress affects it, ashwagandha, herbs, all these different things that can affect autoimmune disease, it's a very good book.
Wonderful. Well, we definitely need a resource out there. Hopefully you'll be writing the next book on
That's
this
the plan.
topic. Yeah, definitely. So would you be able to just share from your experience, obviously having gone through autoimmune disease yourself, what do you think the importance is of diet when you look at all the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine? How would you weight all the different pillars? Obviously, we know they're all important, but if you could talk us a little bit through that and how you see that interplay between those factors.
Yeah. So before I answer this, I think someone's asking what the name of the book is. It's called Integrative Rheumatology. I don't remember the author's name, but there's not many books called Integrative Rheumatology, so you should be able to find it. And as far as 6 pillars, diet's definitely up there. And stress. I think diet and stress are up there. Stress, I've seen patients flare with divorces, with loss of a loved one. I've seen this trigger autoimmune disease, because I always ask my patients, what happened before you got your disease, or what happened before you started getting these pains? And sometimes they do say like a very stressful event did happen, but diet has to be the foundation. I tell them, if you don't eat right, even if you can't go whole food plant-based, just go Mediterranean or something anti-inflammatory. Just get those fruits and vegetables in. Because if you do that, you're well on your way. Anything other than a Western diet can be very helpful. So stress and diet are my top 2. And then exercise is anti-inflammatory as well. So, I mean, they're all very, very important. You got to sleep right. That affects the immune system. You got to exercise. That's anti-inflammatory. And you got to avoid drugs and smoking. So all these things are very important. I don't think, but if I had to choose my top 2 is stress and diet.
No, I completely agree. And I think that so often when you change the way that you're eating, 3 or more times a day, so many other things fall into place, like the movement, the sleeping better, getting out, hopefully having a walking buddy or an exercise buddy. All of these things can really help. And for everyone who's listening, who's not aware of Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, we have brilliant fact sheets, completely free, downloadable on our website, which you can print off, that have tips on how to eat the plant-based diet, how to deal with things like if you get bloated from eating beans and lentils. These are common complaints that people say time and time again of some of the challenges when eating this way. But I can guarantee you that the most vast majority of people, these are not long-term complaints. These are just, these are things that you can take on board when you're making a switch to eating more plants. Just to ask you finally, how did you make the transition to eating a plant-based diet? Did you take it step by step? Or you mentioned that, for you, a lot of the benefits were visible very quickly. Was it something that was completely overnight for you, or how did it work?
Yeah, so my wife did introduce me to lifestyle medicine because at Loma Linda there is a lifestyle medicine fellowship and a certificate, and she did go through that. So she first got exposed to it and then tried to get me into it, and I couldn't do it in the very beginning. I thought it was a crazy diet, but after watching Forks Over Knives, I said, let's just give it a shot. So I went completely whole food plant-based the next day, and within actually 2 months, my pain actually went really low or completely away. And then after 3 months, my labs went negative. And very just recently, a couple months ago, after 2 years, my ESR, another inflammatory marker, went negative. So after 10 years, all my inflammatory markers are negative. So sometimes I do get pain here and there when I'm very stressed or eat a little bit too much processed food, but overall, the pain is nothing like it was before. I'm not limping anymore. So it's been like a miracle.
That's incredible to hear. And lastly, just so, because I know lots of people who actually have joined this webinar are not already eating, a plant-based way of eating. What would a typical day look like for you in terms of food? What would be sort of your breakfast, lunch, or dinner if you eat all three of those meals?
Yeah, I'm either not eating or I'm eating oatmeal or a smoothie or something just very simple. Nothing extravagant, just fruits. I usually just like to eat fruits for breakfast. Lunchtime, lunchtime and dinner, I would say sometimes similar. Potatoes, sometimes beans, lentils, fruits, dried fruits, soups. My favorite, which is not my wife's favorite because I make it so much, is basically a miso soup with tofu, some onions, and what else do I put in there? Mushrooms as well. Yeah, green onions. So something very simple. I do eat rice, I eat quinoa, make curries. There's nothing that is very, but I mean, fruits and vegetables are very, very consistent, but there's no one typical food that I always eat. Sometimes I eat what my wife cooks, Dr. Melissa. So one thing she likes to make is a squash with some quinoa in it, some onions. So something very clean, nothing too extravagant.
I love that, because I know you both run your practice and you're both superstars on social media, and I would really recommend everyone go and follow you at My Autoimmune MD, because you share so many incredible tips. And you're just such an inspiring duo. I definitely need to get Melissa on the webinar program next time, because she's really inspiring herself. But I want to thank you again for sharing your expertise with us. This is actually the last webinar I'll be doing for this summer until we are back with a brand new program in September. So we've been running this for 15 months since the first lockdown in the UK last year. So it's been a fortnightly program. And I just want to thank everyone who's supported this program and who's been joining us regularly. I can see some people who have been here every fortnight, which is just incredible. And we are so grateful for all your support. So thank you again. And I hope you have a lovely day. Looks like the sun is shining where you are, as always.
Yes, it's noon over here.
Very, very jealous. And thanks everyone, and good night.